The time is running, and inside the Indian tradition there appeared a new system of texts called the Upanishads. The very term Upanishad is linguistically constructed in the following way. Upa means near, ni means the strengthening prefix, and shada from the root sad, to sit down. It's same as the English word to sit. So Upanishada is sitting near. Upanishads were the first system of Indian texts which pretend to some extra esotericity. Unlike Vedas, which were proclaimed officially and ritually, Upanishads were texts which were said unofficially and in private. They were kind of explanations, personal, which the teacher gave to his apprentice. From here is this word sitting near. Upanishads, metaphorically speaking, were proclaimed quietly. It was a deeper explication. If Vedas concentrated on some external ritual sacrifice, the Upanishads concentrated in the inner work which the practitioner must perform. There are quite many Upanishads. It's considered them to be 108. In fact, there are more of them. Actually, every tradition chooses its own 108 favorite Upanishads. But depending on the tradition, there exist 8, 10 or 11 so-called great or most ancient Upanishads. They are called most ancient because they are truly most ancient, and they are greatest because they were chosen as greatest in the 8th century by Shankara. He was also the one who wrote commentaries to them, and actually many of later thinkers were commenting the commentaries of Shankara or gave their own commentaries for these very Upanishads, keeping in mind that even and only these Upanishads are the basis of the all further Indian knowledge. The dating of Upanishads is also vague, especially these most ancient ones. But according to the modest calculations, they are about 2500 years old. However, Indian pundits state that Katha Upanishad is 7000 years old. Neither of these statements could be ultimately proven, but the fact is the most ancient Upanishads exist. And one of the most ancient, the deepest and the most archetypical Upanishads is the Katha Upanishad. The plot of Katha Upanishad is the following. It starts with the prologue, in which there lived some Brahman which made the sacrifice. He sacrificed cows and other agricultural goods, but his son Nachiketas doubted the efficiency of this sacrifice. The son was very concerned with this matter, and he told his father his doubts. Surely the father was angry with his son, and then the son asked his father, "Whom would you sacrifice me?" And the father said, "I sacrifice you to Yama." So probably he sacrificed his son to the god of death. So this could be interpreted as a shamanic journey. And then Nachiketas, having been sacrificed, went to Yama. He approached to Yama's house, but Yama was out, and Nachiketas spent 3 days waiting for him. Finally Yama came back and was confused with the fact that to his guest of Brahmanic origin, nobody gave neither food nor drink, nor proper accommodation, so the hospitality ritual was broken. And Yama felt himself guilty. And then, to make amends, he asked, "What do you want, Nachiketas, to eliminate my guilt?" As a response, Nachiketas asked for several gifts. Firstly, that his father wouldn't be angry at him, that he could go back to the world of living, and then he asked Yama to explain him one important matter. When the person is dead, does he exist or doesn't he? What happens with the man after death? Who, but not you, Yama, could answer this question? Yama tried to get off the hook. He said that this question is difficult even for the gods. He replied, "Please ask for anything, for the chariots, for the horses, for the gold, for the women which are as beautiful as no one mortal could imagine. All this will be yours, but don't make me answer this question." But Nachiketas reasonably responded, "How could I make joy of all of this if you, Yama, the god of death, is near? If I have already seen you?" So what's the key point of Katha Upanishad? I would say that Katha Upanishad is the earliest meditation on death. Verily, when the person appears in some life-threatening situation, or one must make the life-changing choice, or the death threatens one's, only in these kinds of situations a person might figure out what is truly important for him and what is not, what is truly valuable and what is quite secondary. And Yama could not get off the hook, and he answered the question which he promised to answer. And Yama started telling Nachiketas what is the fire of spirit which burns within the man. Note that the spiritual burning metaphor was firstly proclaimed in the Katha Upanishad. and not by Zweig or by Gesse, and not by the medieval authors. The very image of man as a fire, the idea of inner spiritual burning, this metaphor was first given in Katha Upanishad. Well, in fact, it is an amazing motive. I tried to reach Vedas in the following perspective. All the metaphors which we are using right now in literature, poetry, are firstly given in Vedas. Vedas is a kind of basic list of all the metaphors upon which all the European culture is built. But most importantly, Yama started telling Nachiketas about the teaching which allows one to avoid the ties of death. And here, in Katha Upanishad, the term yoga is used for the first time. Moreover, in the 3rd chapter of Katha Upanishad, the exact definition of yoga is given. It sounds in Sanskrit as following: Tam yogamiti manyate sthiram indriyam dharanam. Tam yogamiti manyate, that is considered to be yoga. Sthiram, firm. Indriyam, senses, organs. Dharanam, control. Or otherwise, yoga is the firm control of the senses. And it's not the control of the feelings, it's exactly the control of the senses. And we're talking about the control of the senses, and we mean not the eyes and the ears, because the eyes and the ears could easily be closed, but we mean the control of attention, which aims our senses to the external objects. Developing the idea of control, Yama pronounces the metaphor which is one of the basic metaphors for all the later yoga, which is the metaphor of chariot. The human body is compared with the sort of cart. The body, deha, is the cart. The organs of senses, the indriyas, are the horses. If one's organs of senses are weak, then the cart goes nowhere. And if the feelings, the senses, are desperate, insane, the cart could easily be destroyed. That's why to control the senses we need manas, the mind. Manas plays the role of charioteer, who rules the organs of senses. And if Manas, as the charioteer, is skillful enough, then he can make this chariot to go where it's needed to go. But there arises a question if there is the master of the chariot. The charioteer is not needed by itself, as well as chariot by itself is needless for us. There has to be someone who owns and rides this chariot. This someone is called Dhira in Katha Upanishad, the thinking one, derived from the root dhyai, the one who thinks, the one who contemplates. Later in Bhagavad Gita, the same one was called Dehin, the one who owns the body. In Yoga Sutra, he is called Drashtar, the inner observer. In the late existentialism, it's called the existence, Sein, and all the other phenomena of this kind, which is the 20th century. So this image tells us that there is something in the human which is not same as his body, his mind, or his feelings or organs of senses. Something which comprises the wholeness and the meaning of existence. And its aim is to take control of the all lower functions. In other words, the basis of human, the Atman, has to establish control over Buddhi, the higher mind, which in its turn has to control Manas, the mind which makes decisions, the intellectual mind, and senses in their turn control the physical body. That in fact is the metaphor of control, the essence of yoga, which is described in Katha Upanishad. We must admit that the very same metaphor was used by Plato in the absolutely different part of the world. Here we see the depiction of the fountain in Louvre, which is made in the style of ancient Greece or ancient Rome. The Poseidon with different horses in the chariot. Some of the horses are more like horses, while some of them are more like snakes, and all of them go into different sides. And this chariot even better exemplifies the position of a man when the different organs, different feelings, drag the person into different sides, into different directions. And it's difficult to curb these all together. Note that Aristotle has talked about existence of several souls within the man. There are vegetal, animal, and human souls. And the aim of a man is to curb his vegetal and animal souls. Again, there arises a question if these teachings are somehow linked with each other. The question is difficult and there is no scientific answer for it. But for the people of post-Soviet space, there still exists the phenomenon of so-called Iron Curtain in their perception. And for this person, going abroad is in some sense the significant act, and the assumption that it was much easier for people to communicate and to travel before is not that easily perceived. But consider this, the distance between India and Greece is about 8 hours going by plane, it's around a year going by the chariot. So could there be any cultural intercourses? And yes, there were cultural connections. Several historians, such as Plutarch and Apuleius, state that when Alexander the Great was in India, he brought back with himself so-called hymnosophists. Hymnos stands for naked, sophist is the sage, so he brought the naked sages, who made a huge impression on the Greek sages. On the other hand, in the Buddhist tradition there exists such a text as the Melinda's Questions. But Melinda is the Pali, the Hindu transcription of Greek name Menander. The king who organized this monastic dispute was the Greek in origin. In Sanskrit there is a special word, Yavan, which is the notion of Greeks, and is derived from the word Ionia. So in fact there was a cultural exchange, but how deep were they, we don't know. There is a theory according to which Greeks themselves consider Dionysus, who was the master of Dionysian mysteries and took part in Orphic mysteries, the esoteric Greek traditions, commenced the 3-year journey to India. Who was assumed to be Dionysus? Is it the true character or the mythological figure? We don't know. But I think there is no fume without a fire. And last but not least, the Greek language truly resembles Sanskrit. So there could be common roots of these teachings, which we can see from one side in the Greek and from the other in the Hindu tradition. Recently there was published a book which compares the hymns of the Greek poet Pindar and the hymns of Rig Veda. And this book shows lots of parallels, so these hymns resemble each other. So either this is an archetype of collective unconscious, or these are some common roots. It probably would be not possible to prove anything in our time. But this way or the other, the metaphor of chariot was inherent not only to yoga. We encounter this metaphor in Greek philosophy as well. Except for the chariot metaphor and the idea of yoga as the control of the senses, Katha Upanishad had proclaimed lots of basic yoga ideas. One of the key ideas is the need for self-knowledge. Katha Upanishad states the following. When one's senses are linked to the external objects, then he is scattered, dissipated, and in this way, in this sense, he is grabbed by the death. But when one starts turning his senses from outer objects back inside oneself, then he starts sensing something inside oneself, his true self. And this true self is the answer for the questions. So Katha Upanishad is the first to pose the question of self-reflection. And this self-reflection is not the hypochondria like in modern psychoanalysis, but it's the exploration of one's own inner identity. It's the active self-knowledge, and if we compare this to the modern techniques, then what are we talking about when we're saying knowing oneself? Probably we're talking about knowing our true desires, we're acknowledging our mission, and last but not least, we're making our own decision basing on our own, but not some external factors of what are we going to do in this or that situation. That is what self-knowledge is about. And if we would like to find some external analogies, we would at once memorize the ancient Greece, the Socrates. Know thyself and you would know the whole world. As you remember, the Socrates has the idea that all the knowledge is already within oneself, and he easily proved this. If we, posing right questions to someone, can lead him to the right answer, then this answer he already had. The only thing that he couldn't reach this answer by himself, and in this case, the soul already has all the answers to all the questions. One only needs to look inside himself. Does it remind us of Katha Upanishad? Well, it does. Surely it's not the complete resemblance, but some parallels we can make. The next concept of Katha Upanishad is the category of prana in Indian tradition. This word is made from the root an, which means to breathe. Pra means universal, so prana is the universal breath. In Katha Upanishad it states that prana lies in the basis of everything, in the basis of life, in the basis of the world. What is prana is not yet explained, but this conception is used by all the later yogic texts. Besides, Katha Upanishad first is talking about maintaining the prana and the necessity of it. Upanishad poses the following metaphor. The human is like a city with 9 gates. The gates are the organs of senses. The Jnanendriya, the perceiving organs of senses, and Karmendriya, the active organs of senses, like hands, feet, and so on. So if one is linked to the external objects, the energy, the prana, leaves, abandons this city. But if one concentrates and holds prana, he keeps it within oneself. This metaphor could be seen in lots of later traditions, from Yoga Sutra till the modern yoga. Furthermore, in the end, in the 3rd chapter of Katha Upanishad, there is an idea of emotional ties, which are actually called the knots, the ties which are binding the heart. And only when one gets rid of these ties, one gets rid of his karma. Only then will he be liberated. And there are many other ideas in Katha Upanishad. I wrote a separate lecture on Katha Upanishad and it took me about 3 hours to cover it, and I would not go deeper right now. But I'd like to emphasize how deep this Upanishad is and how many further directions for the future generations it had opened. As I said, the very term yoga was defined in Katha Upanishad, but yoga was also mentioned in another line, which states that when one would discover oneself by means of yoga, therefore yoga was conceived as means of self-exploration. So the term yoga is mentioned twice in Katha Upanishad.